Gaza Strip, period. It's really small down there around Rafah, and you got 1 million to 1.5 million people that are seeking safety. And so any credible plan that could be executable would have to take into account their physical movement, safe movement, as well as proper subsistence for them, food, water, medicine, access to health care, and be able to stay together as family units. So all of that would have to be factored in.
Does the White House believe there is any possible plan out there that would be executable, given the infrastructure situation within
food,
Gaza
water,
right
medicine. Again, we haven't seen what the Israelis are thinking and what exactly they're be able to stay Prime Minister together as family units. So all of that would have to do exactly that. So we'll see what they come up with.
There is any possible plan
obviously
out
you're
there
urging
that would
Congress
be
to act. You all have been
executable,
fairly
given the
optimistic, but
infrastructure
realistically, I mean,
situation?
Speaker Johnson doesn't seem to have
Again,
interest
we haven't seen what the
bringing up
Israelis
this
are
bill to
thinking
fund
and
Ukraine and Israel.
exactly,
So,
be able to
what is staying? Is there a plan B if Congress doesn't get this done?
all of that would have to do exactly that. Hypotheticals. I think the president was very clear in his
There
statement.
is
It's
any
really important that the House now takes
Obviously,
this
you're
up.
urging Congress to act. You all have been fairly
Given the
optimistic, but
infrastructure
realistically, I mean, Speaker Johnson doesn't seem to have
Again,
interest
we haven't seen
in
what the
bringing up
Israelis
this
are
bill to
thinking.
fund Ukraine and Israel.
When we submitted the supplemental back in October, there is no magical pot of money from which to draw to try to support these allies and these partners, and to try to support, oh, by the way, significant humanitarian assistance needs, not just in Gaza, but elsewhere around the world. Congress needs to act. They need to be the ones to move forward.
But are you seeing any cause for optimism that Congress is actually going to do anything? Because so far, it certainly doesn't seem like the Speaker is moving in that direction.
I think today's a pretty optimistic sign that it got through the Senate. That's not an insignificant milestone. And again, we're grateful for the bipartisan leadership in the Senate. Now it's time for the House to act the same way.
And can you say broadly, I mean, if this doesn't get done, this lack of funding, not to mention Trump's recent comments about NATO, what message broadly is this sending our allies and the world about our ability to follow through on our commitments? I mean, can we be trusted?
It sends messages, if we don't get this done, it sends messages not just to allies and partners, but to potential adversaries as well, that the United States can't be counted on, that we're not interested in being a leader on the world stage, that we aren't going to be able to stand by our commitments to allies and partners who are fighting really critical fights here. Israel's in a fight literally for their lives, and the Ukrainians are too, for their democracy. So I think it sends a strong signal to the whole world that perhaps certain members of Congress aren't willing to show and demonstrate the kind of American leadership on the world stage that President Biden has.
Jake Sullivan yesterday met virtually with the families of the 6 American hostages who are in Gaza. And in a statement after that meeting, the hostage families said that they expressed frustration with the pace of negotiations. Does the White House share in that frustration?
We would love nothing more, Arlette, than to have every single hostage back with their families yesterday and the day before that. We are working with a real sense of alacrity and urgency here to try to get an extended pause in place. But it's been difficult. I can't blame, nobody can blame these families for being frustrated and for being anxious and being fearful. Of course they are. Anybody would, any of you would. And I think one of the things that Jake conveyed to them was how seriously we're taking the task and how hard we are working at it. And as I said earlier, we believe that the discussions have been constructive and that in general things seem to be moving in the right direction, but nothing is done until it's all done.
Is something standing in the way from things moving faster?
I won't get into the bits about negotiations and what the points are that are still being horse traded, but there are in fact active discussions going on about certain modalities that would have to take place to make this work. And again, I think the less said about that publicly, the better.
And then if I could just on Ukraine really quickly, does the president plan on making any personal appeal to the House Speaker, a phone call, or having him at the White House?
I'm not aware of any personal appeal, although in terms of like today, although as you know, the Speaker was here at the White House and had a chance to hear directly from not only President Biden, but his national security team about the importance of supporting Ukraine and Israel going forward, how important the supplemental funding was. So the Speaker certainly has heard directly from the President.
A couple more. Thank you so much. I would have two questions on Gaza. The first one, yesterday during his remarks with the King of Jordan, the president said over 27,000 Palestinians have been killed in this conflict, and this is the death count that has been made public by Hamas. So do you confirm that this death toll is accurate and can be seen as the official death toll in Gaza? Have you been able to verify this figure?
The president was referring to publicly available data about the total number of casualties, and as he said, too many of that total number, unfortunately, are innocent civilians. He was referring to publicly available data.
And my next question is, when the administration asked Israel to come up with a credible plan to protect civilians before it launches a major offensive in Rafah, does that mean that until now you think that Israel has been operating with a credible plan to protect civilians in northern Gaza, for example?
Again, we're not, it's hard to, I don't want to get into armchair quarterbacking past operations here. That said, as you saw when they operated in North Gaza, and then as they started to operate more in Khan Yunis, they did take steps to allow safe passage for civilians. They dropped leaflets telling them where to go and how to get there. They relied less on air power. So there were efforts. That does not mean, and it does not excuse any single civilian casualty. They're all tragedies. We don't want to see any. But the Israelis have shown an effort in the past to try to account for the movement and the safety of civilians. And again, as they ponder and consider major operations in Rafah, now with everybody moving down there because of what happened in North Gaza, because of what happened in Khan Yunis, they have a special added burden to make sure that they can provide for their safety and security and sustenance.
Thank you. I have a question about Venezuela, but first about the Vice President traveling to the Munich Security Conference this week. How important do you think the situation in the Middle East is going to be during the conference, and what kind of support the U.S. would like to get from allies for Ukraine?
There's no doubt that what's going on in the Middle East, I'm sure, will be a topic of discussion at the Munich Security Conference. There's no way it wouldn't, and I know the Vice President will have an opportunity to lay out again the administration's approach to the region writ large, as well as our work, continued work with our counterparts in the Middle East specifically.
And about Venezuela, sorry, do you have a reaction to the detention by the Venezuelan government of the human rights activist Rocio San Miguel?
We are aware of reports that Rocio San Miguel, and I think a couple of members of her family now, have been taken into custody. We're deeply concerned about that. This is a time when, as I have said before, Mr. Maduro needs to meet the commitments that he made back in the fall about how they're going to treat civil society, political activists, as well as opposition parties, and even those members of Venezuelan society that may want to run for office. They've got to meet those commitments. I won't go into speculating about what exactly happened here or what we might do as a result, but I can tell you we're watching this very, very closely, and we're deeply concerned by her arrest.
Thank you, Karine. Thank you, John. I have two questions on Indo-Pacific, one question on Ukraine. So first, the Senate bill that just passed, does the White House wish to have more fund for Indo-Pacific in this bill or the next bill, specifically for countering China and helping Taiwan?
The president, as I think he made clear in his statement, is satisfied with the bipartisan work that went into the Senate bill and the dollar amounts that are in each of the buckets there: Ukraine, Israel, Indo-Pacific, humanitarian assistance.
Another Indo-Pacific, Indonesia is going to have election tomorrow, electing a new president. What are at stake for the U.S. in relations to its Indo-Pacific strategy on this election?
Well, what really matters is what's at stake for the Indonesian people. And we want them to have a free and fair election. And we want the aspirations and the votes of the Indonesian people to matter. It's a vibrant democracy. And so we look forward to seeing them be able to go to the polls and make their choices and make their voices known. We, as you know, we deepened our strategic partnership with Indonesia now. We're looking forward to continuing to find ways to improve that bilateral relationship.
One last question. The U.S. have enough money right now to keep training Ukraine pilots on the F-16 for now, according to the National Guard chief. So when will this training wrap up, and what's the status of sending those planes to Ukraine?
You'd have to talk to the Department of Defense on that. I don't have that information.
Thank you, Colleen and John. I have two questions on Russia and North Korea. Russia's foreign ministry stated that North Korean Kim Jong-un's military threats were not rhetoric and are a direct risk signal of conflict on the Korean Peninsula and should be taken seriously. How can you explain the intent of that statement?
I'm sorry, I did not get what you meant. The foreign minister said what? Russian, this is Lavrov said?
Yeah, foreign ministry said that North Korean Kim Jong-un military threats were not rhetoric, and that is that risk of signal of that conflict on the Korean Peninsula.
Well, look, we take the continued efforts by Kim Jong-un to advance and develop sophisticated weapon systems and capabilities very, very seriously. We have to. And we also take our alliance with the Republic of Korea very, very seriously, which is why, as I've said many times, the president has added resources, added capabilities, really invested more in deepening our bilateral relationship with South Korea and our trilateral relationship with South Korea and Japan.
Russia also has lifted some of North Korean frozen funds and also allowed the North Korea's financial bank account to be opened in Russia. So this point, can this be seen as a compensation for the trade, arms trade between Russia and North Korea?
I can't confirm those reports that they've actually made those financial transactions, and certainly wouldn't be able to speculate about what motivated them. But obviously, we're deeply concerned about the continuing burgeoning defense relationship between North Korea and Russia.
Thank you, Karine. Admiral, you've been asking Israel to avoid killing Palestinian civilians from this podium many times. So I'm going to share the statistics with you. On day one, there's 198 people were killed. On day 128, 117. So on average, it's 100. So either Israel not listening to you, or they believe there are no consequences. So which one is it, or is it both?
You have to look. I'm not going to speak for Israeli military operations, Nadia. You know that.
I'm not asking you to speak for the Israeli military. I'm asking for you because you defending the point of view always that no civilian should be killed. So the number has never been reduced. It stayed steady all the time. So I'm asking you,
As the president,
whether is the White House is message to Netanyahu, who defies every democratic president, whether it's Clinton, Obama, or Biden, and you know that this is a fact. Do you think that they're not listening to you, or they believe they can get away with it? So
As
what
the-
pressure are you putting on them? That's what my question to you.
as the president said yesterday, too many of the many thousands of people killed in the Gaza conflict have been innocent civilians. Too many. And we have been very, very clear about our concerns with our Israeli counterparts about that. And I can't verify the specific numbers that you're giving me, but I'm not here to refute them. Too many is too many. And that's why we're going to keep working with our Israeli counterparts to do everything we can to get them to reduce the number of civilian casualties. And they have been receptive. I understand that there are still civilian casualties, and that's unacceptable. But they have been receptive to our messaging. They have been receptive to our ideas and our perspectives in the past, and we're going to keep doing everything we can to get those numbers down.
John, yesterday you said that we need to accept the possibility that some of the hostages being held by Hamas may no longer be alive. Does the U.S. believe that all of the remaining American hostages are still alive?
We don't have any information to the contrary.
And one more, if I may. Of course, any operation in Rafah would be Israel's decision, and they're the ones who need to come up with who need to present a credible plan. But has the U.S., has the president, have any senior U.S. officials offered their thoughts or consultations on what can be done to help Palestinian civilians in Rafah?
We have consistently shared our concerns, our opinions, our perspectives, our lessons learned about urban warfare since the beginning of this conflict.
But specifically about, what to do in this case with where Palestinian civilians might be able to go in Rafah.
We're not involved in drafting their plan for them, but we have absolutely committed to them our concerns about what that plan ought to be able to account for. Yes.
Now, if Israel were to ignore it.
I'm not going to, again, speculate about a situation that hasn't occurred yet. We've been very clear about our concerns. We've been clear about what our concerns are and what we want to see.
what the IDF
Prime Minister
comes up with.
Netanyahu
Finally, by
said
when would
publicly
the
that
US
he's
like to
tasked
see it?
the IDF to come up with such
It's
a plan.
really going to be
Let's see what
determined
they
by
come up
whatever
with.
timetable
US have
the
enough leverage now
IDF is on.
if
I
Israel
want to
were
make
to
it
war.
clear here. I'm not going. This is a sovereign nation. They plan their military operations and they conduct their military operations and they make the choices. There's not. It's not like we give them a homework assignment and they have to then turn in their plan to us for grading. We have said that from our perspective, as a friend of Israel and as a supporter of their efforts to defend themselves, we would expect that any plan for going into Rafah would properly account for the now more than 1 million civilians that are seeking refuge down there.
Hey, John, thanks. I just want to circle back to my colleague, I think it was Nadia, asked a few minutes ago about the civilian casualties, and you said Israel has been receptive to our concerns. And for months, we have heard people at that podium talk about the civilian death toll is too high. It was too high at 5,000, 10,000, 15,000. Around 28,000 people have been killed. What does the White House base the assessment that Israel is receptive to its concerns?
As I said, we have seen them take actions, sometimes actions that even I'm not sure our own military would take, in terms of informing civilian populations ahead of operations, where to go, where not to go. They have taken steps. Now, obviously, those steps, while noteworthy, haven't been enough to reduce the civilian casualties, which is why the president spoke so forthrightly about it yesterday and why we're going to continue to do everything we can to press the Israelis to be more careful.
But respectfully, he's been talking forcefully about it for a long time, and the Israelis are now have hammered people into this tiny corner in southwest Gaza, tight up against the Egyptian border, where people think there's a looming catastrophe happening. Shouldn't there be more forceful action than just words?
We are working very, very closely with our Israeli counterparts. We've made clear our concerns that we would not support a Rafah operation that did not properly account for the more than 1 million refugees that are down in Rafah. We've been very, very clear and consistent about that.
Merci, Karine. John, I have two questions quickly on the DRC, but first on Haiti, the meeting at Fort McNair.